episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 371, The Evolutionary War. The episode begins with Ash and the gang back in a boat after the end of last episode, still on their way to Maz Deep City, sailing across the ocean. Although Max noticed from his Pokénav that they were approaching 3 islands just ahead. That was not at all Maz Deep City. Pikachu didn't care whatsoever, he was just happily looking out into the ocean, but anyways, Max was about to reveal what these 3 islands were called, as the Pokénav also gave him that information, but Brock had already looked up these 3 islands in the guidebook that he had, so he explained about the ABC Islands. That's what they were called. One was the A Island, one was the B Island, and one was the C Island. After explaining about the 3 islands, Brock had mentioned that Island A had a Pokemon Center, so he suggested that the group make a pit stop there. The rest of the group agrees, and along the way, they spot some whalmer swimming nearby, stating their belief that maybe the whalmer were kind of showing them the way to the island properly, as kind of like tour guides or some shit. Although the whalmer quickly depart, and instead, Ash and the gang see a group of children riding some water Pokemon. There was probably like a good 10 kids, and they were all riding on the same 2 water Pokemon, and they were going extremely fast, much to Ash and the gang and Pikachu's surprise. Although, even with the speed, Ash and May were able to scan the 2 Pokemon with their Pokedex, with Ash scanning a Huntail and May scanning a Gorbis, and upon scanning them, they learned that both Huntail and Gorbis evolved from Clamperl. It was essentially a split evolution, like Eevee. Anyways, Ash and the gang turn their attention back to the fast kids, and they realize that they must have been racing each other, and they see a girl get knocked off her Huntail, as a boy on a Gorbis knocks her off. Ash and the gang go up to the girl and stop the boat to make sure that she was okay, and she says that she was, and merely just gets back on her Huntail and resumes racing, barely paying any attention to the fact that she was knocked off in the first place. Ash and the gang then start their boat back up, and they see many more boys and girls crashing into each other, since they all wanted to come first in the race to A Island. Also along the way, Ash and the gang saw 2 other kids, a boy and a girl, that didn't appear to be part of the Huntail Gorbis race, since they were racing on pedal boats instead, and they were arguing about whether Huntail or Gorbis was better, with the boy advocating for Huntail and the girl advocating for Gorbis. As the boy and the girl reached A Island, Ash and the gang just continued on their boat as well, curious as to why these 2 kids were arguing so loudly. Meanwhile, as for Team Rocket, they were of course chasing after Ash and the gang in their Magikarp submarine, but suddenly they got their Magikarp submarine stuck between 2 boulders underwater. Team Rocket pedaled as hard as they could to try and break free from the rocks, pedaling at literal full power, but they couldn't escape the rocks, and they managed to damage the submarine's hull, causing a whole bunch of water to leak in, flooding the entire sub. Meanwhile, Ash and the gang had now arrived on A Island, specifically the Pokemon Center there, and greeted Nurse Joy, with Brock trying to flirt with her as usual, leaving Max to drag him away as usual. Ash was about to ask Nurse Joy to heal up his Pokemon, but before he could, Nurse Joy had to go away from the desk for a little bit because she was getting a call on her computer from a local trainer named Midori, and she soon brought her Corsola to the screen, explaining that it had a cold and needed treatment. So Nurse Joy promised to give it the best care she could, and with that, the trainer sent Corsola to Nurse Joy via the Pokemon Center transporter, and then hung up as soon as Nurse Joy assured her that she had received it. Nurse Joy then revealed to Ash and the gang that any Pokemon that got sick on Islands B or C could be teleported right away, since there was only 1 Pokemon Center on Island A, but that's all that was really needed, since anyone could just transport their Pokemon to this center. But this implied that the transporter only worked with all 3 of the islands, which is pretty interesting. But Ash and the gang were pretty amazed by this, rightfully so, because most teleporters could really hook up to any city at all, right? So this was pretty rare. Just then, Ash and the gang and Nurse Joy heard some loud arguing voices, and Ash and the gang questioned where these voices were coming from, leading Nurse Joy to show Ash and the gang her class of students, revealing that there was actually another room inside the Pokemon Center that functioned as a school. So the center was actually a school as well, and Nurse Joy was the teacher. These 2 kids that were causing the loud voices in the class happened to be the same 2 kids that were racing in the paddle boats earlier, arguing about the same thing as earlier, being what was better, Huntail or Gorbis, and who was stronger. Taking the opportunity of Nurse Joy not supervising them to go absolutely apeshit and yell extremely loud. Although, when Nurse Joy revealed herself to the class, they quickly quieted down after Nurse Joy had managed to calm them down. Ash and the gang watched as Nurse Joy made all of the class do a little bit of work with solely some paper, but in order to lift their spirits and make them more excited to learn, she announced that the next class would take place by the outdoor pool, which made all the kids extremely happy as they cheered. On the way to the pool, with Ash and the gang coming along, Nurse Joy told Ash and the gang about the rivalry that people who liked Huntail and people who liked Gorbis had developed, stating that all of the people who liked Huntail came from Island C, and all the people who liked Gorbis happened to come from Island B, and they always had water races to get to Island A, so that they could try and prove to each other which one was better, as if they were proving whether Huntail or Gorbis were better or not, since those are who they would use to ride the races. Also, there were a large number of Clamperl who lived on all the islands, although the Clamperl become Gorbis at Island B and Huntail at Island C, so that explained why Island B preferred Gorbis and Island C preferred Huntail. Eventually, Ash and the gang, Nurse Joy, and her class made it to the pool, where 2 Huntail and 2 Gorbis were dancing around a man, and much to everyone's surprise, since the kids knew who he was as well, Professor Birch was the man in the pool, with the Huntail and Gorbis swimming around him, and Professor Birch was really relaxing, simply just floating around. Well, he was relaxing until the two kids from earlier, which were part of Nurse Joy's class, asked Birch whether Huntail or Gorbis was better. To which Birch clarified that he thought they were both pretty cool. Anyways, while Ash and the gang were simply just shocked to see Professor Birch, Nurse Joy was shocked when Ash and the gang mentioned that Professor Birch was Professor Birch. Apparently, he'd been on the island for a decent amount of time now, and Nurse Joy had seen him before, and she just thought that he was like a random homeless dude or some shit. But knowing that he was the professor of the Hoenn region, Nurse Joy was very shocked to see that Ash and the gang knew him, and happily greeted him, as did Ash and the gang, and they were all greeted back by him. As he came out of the pool, May then states her assumption that Professor Birch must have been on the island because he was doing some sort of research with the Huntail and Gorbis, but Birch said that he was just playing with them for now, and he was actually doing research more so on Clampearl and how they evolved into Huntail and Gorbis. So technically, he was researching Clampearl and Gorbis in relation to their evolution from Clampearl, but he just felt like taking a break and playing with them for now. May was in disbelief that Professor Birch wasn't actually studying, although Professor Birch stated that even if he wasn't studying, he could still learn a lot by simply playing with the Pokemon. Nurse Joy then requests Professor Birch to teach some stuff to the kids for her, since he was obviously more knowledgeable than her, but Birch actually clarified that he wasn't much for teaching anything, even if he was relatively knowledgeable and stuff. He just wasn't a good teacher, but the children were desperate to learn more, especially from someone like Professor Birch. Birch didn't know what to even say though, so he asked May for assistance, and May revealed to Birch that the people that came from Island B really loved Gorbis, and the people that loved Huntail were from Island C, and suggested that he mentioned something about Gorbis and Huntail to them, so Professor Birch told the kids from Island B that Clampearl evolved into Gorbis with a deep sea scale only, whereas he told the people from Island C that Clampearl evolved into Huntail with a deep sea tooth only, and pulls a deep sea tooth replica and a deep sea scale replica outside of his pockets in his shorts to show the kids, while the Huntail and Gorbis were still swimming in the pool. The kids asked Birch where a deep sea scale and deep sea tooth could be found, leading Birch to explain that he had heard that when Clampearl were placed in the water in either Island B or Island C, they tended to soon after evolve into Huntail or Gorbis. So he suspected that he may be able to find the deep sea tooth and deep sea scale in the water in Island B and C if he did enough searching, and declared that he was going to go to Island C first. Ash speaks on the gang's behalf and states how they all wanted to come along with Professor Birch to potentially learn more about Clampearl's evolution, and Birch, of course, allowed them to come with him. So Ash and the gang returned to the Pokemon Center so that they could drop off all the kids with Nurse Joy as well, and they said goodbye to them as Ash and the gang and Birch prepared to board the boat that Ash and the gang had come to the island on so that they could go to Island C. But just before they could go, one of Nurse Joy's students, Nancy, decided to accompany Ash and the gang and Birch by hopping in the boat with them since she lived at the island and wanted to visit there. She likely also wanted to learn more about Huntail and Gorbis though, because she was the same girl from earlier that had been arguing with the boy about whether Gorbis or Huntail was better, and she likely wanted to prove her point by getting more information. So, the boat took off towards Island C, and unbeknownst to everyone, the boy that was arguing with Nancy earlier, named Keith, was following in his pedal boat. Eventually, Ash and the gang and Birch reached Island C and got off the boat and went into a cave that was right next to Nancy's house, who had went there because, that was one of her goals for going to the island. But anyways, Nancy informed Ash and the gang and Birch, since she was from the island, that when Clampearl was placed into the cave water, they evolved into Huntail on the island. Birch then tasted the water and realized that it was full of minerals, just as he suspected, so he took a sample to study. Basically, he figured that there must have been something in the water, like these minerals, that caused Huntail or Gorbis to be the evolution from Clampearl. Suddenly, Ash and the gang, Birch and Nancy were startled as they heard a footstep behind them splashing in a water puddle in the cave, and everyone turned around to see that the sound was caused by none other than Keith, much to Nancy's annoyance, since she hated Keith. Although, suddenly, Keith revealed his reasoning for being on the island, which was because he wanted to learn some information on the evolution of Clampearl that he hated the most, revealing that he had a Clampearl that he wanted to evolve into Gorbis, and he wanted to basically prove that the other evolution, Huntail, that was on this island, was insufficient. Now, this confused Nancy, since she thought that Keith wanted to evolve his Clampearl into a Huntail, because, that's who he advocated for. But Keith remained adamant that he now wanted to evolve his Clampearl into a Gorbis. And the reasoning for this was that since he was from Island B, as opposed to this Island C, he was supposed to want to evolve his Clampearl into a Gorbis, since that's what all the other people on the island did. Although Birch suspected that Keith actually did want to evolve his Clampearl into a Huntail, since coming to study your enemy, or the Pokemon that you didn't like, would make no sense. Keith shouldn't have put all his time into eavesdropping on what Ash and the gang, Birch and Nancy were saying, if he really didn't like Huntail at all. And in order to test if Keith really wanted to evolve his Clampearl into a Gorbis, he stated that he would be going to Island B next, since he intended to investigate both islands to learn about both Huntail and Gorbis. And since Island C was known for evolving Clampearl into Huntail, Island B had to be known for evolving Clampearl into Gorbis, so he wanted to see if Keith would perk up at the prospect of Clampearl evolving into Gorbis at Island B. But Keith didn't really perk up, but he knew that he had to keep pretending like he cared about Gorbis, so he agreed to go to Island B, especially when he revealed that he was from Island B, so Birch just wanted him to come along even more so that Keith could guide them through Island B, since he knew the place. So, without further ado, Ash and the gang and Birch get back on the boat with Keith and go to Island B, and they leave Nancy behind since she claimed that she wanted to stay on Island C, because, she lived there, but she secretly followed Ash and the gang, Birch and Keith on her Pell boat to Island B, because she had a similar situation to Keith. Even though she wanted to evolve her Clamperl into Gorbis, she wanted to pretend like she was more interested in evolving it into Huntail in front of Birch and Ash and the gang. Basically, the only one who knew that she actually wanted to evolve it into a Gorbis was Keith, and the only one that knew that Keith wanted to evolve his Clamperl into Huntail was Nancy. But anyways, Ash and gang, Birch and Keith got off the boat when they arrived at Island B, and they also went into a cave that was by Keith's house on Island B, and Keith showed them inside the cave, and said that if Clamperl was put in the water at Island B, it would in fact evolve into Gorbis. Birch proceeded to do the same thing he did on Island C, which was to taste the water and to taste the same minerals in the water from the water on Island B. So he knew that the water was basically the exact same thing, pretty much. But he knew he couldn't be sure, so he took a sample of the water, regardless, to study it later. Also, just like before, Ash and the gang, Birch and Keith heard a splashing sound, and when they turned around, it was, this time, Nancy, who had stepped in a puddle by accident. And she claims that since Keith had spied on them back on Island C, she felt the need to spy on Keith on Island B to learn more about the Pokemon that she totally didn't want to evolve her Clamperl into, a Gorbis. Well, just like with Keith, Birch accused Nancy of actually wanting to evolve her Clamperl into a Gorbis because she shouldn't have went through all the effort just to spy on Pokemon she didn't like, or to get information on a Pokemon she didn't like. But also just like Keith, Nancy denied this. Birch didn't see the point in pressing Nancy anymore with questions, and just decided to head back to Island A at the Pokemon Center, where he could study both the samples of water, and Ash and the gang, of course, accompanied him back on the boat, as did Keith and Nancy, bringing back their paddle boats with them. Because apparently Keith had brought his paddle boat with him to Island B, or maybe they just left their paddle boats at their respective home islands, who knows. But anyways, Ash and the gang, Birch, Nancy, and Keith all went back to the Pokemon Center, and after a while, Birch declared that after analyzing the water, he finally thought he figured out the scientific details that he had to. Both Keith and Nancy got excited by this, running up to Birch, asking what he had found out, with Keith stating that he had information he wanted to know about Huntail, and Nancy about Gorbis. And this starts another argument, with Keith stating that they didn't need to learn about fucking Gorbis, only Huntail, and Nancy stating the opposite. Eventually, Birch and they worked together to calm both the kids down and revealed to them that they had now just exposed their secret, which was that Nancy actually wanted to evolve her Clamperl into a Gorbis, despite everyone else on her island wanting to evolve it into a Huntail, and Keith wanted to evolve his Clamperl into a Huntail, despite everyone else on his island wanting to evolve it into a Gorbis. Of course, Birch didn't care what they wanted to evolve their Clamperl into, and simply just asked to see their Clamperl to see if he could make sure they were ready to evolve into anything at all. And with that, Ash and the gang, Birch, Nancy, and Keith went back out to the pool where the Huntail and Gorbis were still swimming, and Nancy and Keith sent out their Clamperl. After a visual examination of the Clamperl, Birch comes to the conclusion that the Clamperl looked healthy, and if everything worked out with them, they should each be able to evolve with either a deep sea scale or a deep sea tooth. And also took the opportunity to remind Keith and Nancy that regardless of what everyone else on their island evolved their Clamperl into, they should evolve what they wanted their own Clamperl to evolve into, whether anyone else liked it or not, so long as their Pokemon would be okay with it. Apparently, the pool had an opening to get in from the ocean, because Team Rocket had managed to unflood their Magikarp stuff somehow, and make it into the pool deep down under from the ocean. And of course, they were spying on Ash and the gang, Keith, Nancy, and Birch, using the periscope of their Magikarp sub, and became intrigued by the prospect of stealing the Huntail and Gorbis currently in the pool, with Meowth suggesting that they give all the Huntail and Gorbis in the pool to Giovanni, so that Giovanni could unleash his wild side and do some extreme surfing, and Meowth had a boss fantasy of this, which involved Giovanni surfing on both Huntail and Gorbis at the same time, really enjoying himself. James was skeptical about giving Giovanni Huntail and Gorbis, and adding that they should instead give Giovanni 5 of Eevee's evolutions, but Meowth reminded James that they didn't fucking have access to the Eevee evolutions, and they did have access to Huntail and Gorbis. So, with one person in favor of the plan, and one not in favor, it was up to Jesse to decide, and Jesse happened to like Meowth's plan, so they went through with it, and Wobbuffet popped out his Pokeball to agree as well. So, Team Rocket were officially going to steal the Huntail and Gorbis for Giovanni. Meanwhile, back with Ash and the gang, Nancy, Keith, and Birch, Birch also revealed what he had actually found out about the water, which was that both caves contained regular seawater, aside from the fact that the water from Island B contained particles of deep sea scales, while the water on Island C contained particles of deep sea tooth. He declared that he did have a little bit more research to do on both samples of water, realizing that just because he knew that they contained particles of the deep sea tooth and the deep sea scale didn't mean that he could absolutely guarantee that Huntail and Gorbis would evolve yet, and he needed to see by testing the deep sea tooth and deep sea scale particles. But before he could do this, Team Rocket emerged onto the surface of the pool, startling the Gorbis and Huntail and Ash and the gang, and Birch and Keith and Nancy, as Team Rocket did their motto, and released a net from the Magikarp sub to catch the Huntail and Gorbis inside. Although Ash immediately sent out his Corphish to use its pincers to cut the net and free Huntail and Gorbis. Jessie was pissed off by this, so she sent out her Seviper to get revenge on Corphish by using a bite, but Corphish countered with Harden to protect itself, so Seviper just ended up biting Corphish's head and damaging its teeth because Corphish was so hard. Corphish then follows up with a Crab Hammer to knock Seviper into the water extremely hard. So, with Seviper down from this strong attack, James sends out Cacnea, and although it hugs James first, prickling him, it eventually uses a pin missile and fires it at Clamperl, since James realized that Clamperl was there, and they might as well catch the Clamperl as well. Although Nancy and Keith told both their Clamperl to use iron defense, and this led the two Clamperl to close their shells, and the pins just bounced off. Cacnea had bought time for Seviper at least, though, as it had now recovered and was about to use a poison tail on Corfish, but Corfish countered with Bubble Beam, knocking Seviper back down into the water and stopping the poison tail. Then, Keith and Nancy have both of their Clamperl use a water gun on Cacnea and Seviper while Seviper was still falling into the water, which knocked Cacnea and Seviper into the Magikarp sub. So, Pikachu then used Thunderbolt on the Magikarp sub, sending Team Rocket, along with Cacnea and Seviper, Wobbuffet, and Chimecho, who had popped out of the Pokeball, and joined the Motto, blasting off. Also, destroying Team Rocket's Magikarp sub. So, with that, Ash and the gang, Nancy and Keith celebrated, with Nancy and Keith congratulating their Clamperl, and now Birch declares that it was time for them to go to get the Deep Sea Tooth and Deep Sea Scale, and search for actual items of them inside the water, as opposed to just particles, so that Clamperl could actually potentially evolve. And they decided to go to Island B to look for the Deep Sea Scale first. Specifically, everyone looks in the cave for the evolution item, and Keith was the one to find a Deep Sea Scale, and since it helped evolve Clamperl into Gorbis supposedly, he gave it to Nancy, and then Nancy sent out her Clamperl and placed the scale onto it, but nothing happened. It didn't even evolve, which frustrated Nancy a little bit, though Birch suggested just sending Clamperl to the Pokemon Center, since Clamperl wouldn't evolve right away, even when given the Deep Sea Scale, so maybe it just needed more time. So Nancy agreed, and they went back to her house on the island, and they sent the Clamperl in its Pokeball with the Deep Sea Scale to the Island A Pokemon Center using the transporter in Nancy's house. So with that done, Ash and the gang, Birch, Nancy, and Keith then go to Island C to look for a Deep Sea Tooth, and just like how Keith had found the Deep Sea Scale, Nancy found the Deep Sea Tooth in the cave they were in earlier, underwater, and she gave it to Keith, who then sent out his Clamperl and placed the tooth on it. But just like with Nancy and her Clamperl, Keith's Clamperl still didn't evolve. So Birch suggested that just like with Nancy's Clamperl, the Keith's Clamperl wasn't ready to evolve yet, and it needed a bit more time with the Deep Sea Tooth, so Birch suggested that they go to the house on this island, Keith's house, and use the Pokeball transporter in there to send Keith's Clamperl to the Pokemon Center on Island A, and Keith did so. And with that, Ash and the gang, Keith, Nancy, and Birch returned to Island A at the Pokemon Center to check on how both the Clamperl were doing now. Nurse Joy had received the Pokeballs from the transporters and gave them back to Nancy and Keith, so they sent out their Clamperl that had the Deep Sea Scale and the Deep Sea Tooth in them. Birch was really surprised, since they hadn't evolved yet, and Birch fully expected Clamperl to evolve into Gorbis and Huntail by the time they got back. So, while Birch was confused and not knowing what to do, suddenly both Clamperl began to glow and evolved into both Huntail and Gorbis. Obviously, the one with the Deep Sea Tooth, Keith's, evolving into Huntail just like he wanted, and the one with the Deep Sea Scale, Nancy's, evolving into Gorbis just like she wanted. Rock was amazed that there were other items that could help evolve Pokemon aside from evolutionary stones, and Nancy and Keith were just amazed at having the Pokemon of their dreams, though they were so amazed that they almost forgot that Huntail and Gorbis needed to be in the water. So, Birch and May suggested that Keith and Nancy take Huntail and Gorbis into the pool outside for a swim, and they agreed and happily watched Huntail and Gorbis swim as Ash and the gang and Birch came out to watch as well. Just then, though, the peace was disturbed as Team Rocket returned. Their Magikarp sub was destroyed, but this time they returned in a gigantic Kingler mech, and Meowth instantly pressed a button and pulled a lever in the mech to send one of the mech's claws straight for Gorbis to capture it, although Nancy told Gorbis to dodge using agility, and it did so, and Keith told his Huntail to attack with Bite. But as Huntail charged forward, it just bounced off the hard mech. So Ash took action, sending out his Grovyle to use Bullet Seed, but just like Huntail, the Bullet Seed simply bounced off the mech as well. Both Huntail and Gorbis team up for a joint Water Pulse, though, and this was enough to hit the mech, knocking it back briefly, although the mech very quickly recovers, and Meowth fires a claw at Huntail and Gorbis to attack them. However, Huntail and Gorbis just dive underwater to dodge the detached Kingler mech hand, but while they were underwater, Meowth deployed a second claw from the Kingler mech, which released a net, so right as Gorbis and Huntail resurfaced from the water, they were caught inside this net. However, they were instantly freed as Ash had his Grovyle use a Leaf Blade to cut the net and free Huntail and Gorbis, and then Nancy had her Gorbis use Confusion to levitate the mech up into the air. So Huntail could then unleash a Screech to damage the mech, and Pikachu destroys the mech and sends Team Rocket blasting off once again in an explosion of pink smoke with a Thunderbolt. Team Rocket were annoyed at this, but they were even more annoyed when Wobbuffet forcibly popped out of the Pokeball, forcing Jessie to recall it. Anyways, with Team Rocket gone, Ash and the gang, Birch, Nancy, and Keith cheered with happiness, and they congratulated their Huntail, and Keith and Nancy congratulated their Huntail and Gorbis, and admired how well they worked together. May admitted she was impressed with Keith and Nancy for being able to know all of Huntail and Gorbis' attacks despite never using them before, and states that if they admitted that Gorbis and Huntail made a good team, they should realize that they could make a good team as well and stop fighting. And Nancy and Keith agreed to this, officially becoming friends and ending their rivalry, admitting that both Huntail and Gorbis were cool. Nurse Joy then called out to Ash and the gang, and it was revealed that Ash had actually told Nurse Joy that he was going to Maz Deep City soon, so Nurse Joy had actually booked Ash a boat to come and pick them up and bring them closer to Maz Deep City. And Nurse Joy basically came out of the Pokemon Center to warn Ash and the gang that their boat was ready to go. So, not wanting to miss the boat, they quickly ran out to the dock with Birch and Joy accompanying them, and they got on their boat, saying goodbye to Birch and Joy, with Birch confirming that he was going to be staying on the island for the ABC Islands for a while to continue his Clampro research, and wished Ash and the gang all the best. The boat then started up and pulled away from the ABC Islands to go onwards, but Ash and the gang realized that Keith and Nancy never said goodbye to them. But they soon also realized that was because Keith and Nancy had just boarded their Huntail and Gorbis, and they had just rowed them out to sea to say goodbye to Ash and the gang while they were riding away in the boat, as Huntail and Gorbis caught up to the boat with Keith and Nancy on it. Nancy and Keith then revealed that the people on B Island and C Island were actually getting along well now, since after Keith and Nancy had showed their respective Pokemon, the people on the island realized that they didn't have to evolve their Clamperl into one specific Pokemon anymore, and could just go to the respective other island to evolve their Clamperl into the other Mon. Also, Keith and Nancy explaining about how Huntail and Gorbis worked well together made the people on B and C Island realize they could work together well as well. Ash and the gang were elated to hear this news, and waved goodbye to Nancy, Keith, and their Huntail and Gorbis as the boat continued on to Moss Deep City, hopefully. Ash and the gang were very proud to have found something out about Pokemon evolution that they didn't know before.